Hello, welcome back to our special little series we're doing with the College Football UK podcast. As you will know, over the last few weeks we've done some general conference-wide discussions looking at potential winners, but actually what we thought we'd do is do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the actual teams within conferences, and no better way to do it than bring on our incredible Asleep at Work hosts from around the network. And today we've got with us Ollie from Hurdle the Line to talk all about Ohio State. This conversation might be painful for me, but I'll go through with it anyway. Ollie, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Excited to talk a little bit of college. Something I don't think I've ever done on a microphone before. Obviously happy to contribute to the college pod. You guys do a really great job over there. So really happy to come on and give my thoughts on Ohio State. And obviously with you being a Michigan fan, I'm sure a lot of Ohio
Yeah.
State fans might be angry at me for even doing this. But some unfortunately we can't always have it our way, and unfortunately my producer
No.
is does happen to be a Michigan fan, so I did have to do this with a Michigan fan, so I do apologise to all the Ohio State fans for that, but
But
I'm sure we'll be able to put that aside and have a good conversation.
probably not, but we'll try. No, with this will be a respectful and wonderful conversation, I am sure. Well, we'll get straight into it, I think. Um, and first thing we'll do is we'll take a look at the off season. Now, Ohio State have had a very highly thought of both recruiting class and especially a transfer portal, brought in some absolutely brilliant names. Do you want to tell us any particular that stand out to you? I've got a few here, but obviously,
Yeah, I mean, so I think the biggest two, I mean, just straight off the bat, the biggest two names I think coming in, like in terms of name value and stuff like that, you've got Caleb Downs coming from Alabama, arguably one of the best freshman seasons at that safety position we've seen in a while. Was freshman of the year in the SEC last season. Kind of a surprising one, kind of out of the blue. I remember just seeing it pop up
hmm
on Twitter and being like, "Wow!" It kind of capped off that good run that they went on over that couple of weeks in the transfer portal. And then I think if you look at the recruits coming in, obviously who other than Jeremiah Smith, um, one of the highest. I think he is the highest ever recruited wide receiver by 247. Um, he's 6'3", 215 pounds, an absolute kind of freak, athletic profile. Kind of he's been comped to Julio Jones as at coming out of high school. Already at that young of an age. So if you get that kind of comparison at that young of an age, you're doing things right. So I think they're two of the biggest names. I think overall, I mean, you look at a lot of players coming back that you probably thought might have entered the draft last season. You look at Amika Ibuka, wide receiver, arguably could have been a first rounder last year. You look at a lot of the mocks, they had him going at the back end of that first round. He obviously decided to come back. Travion Henderson, another one, running back, could have entered the draft last year, but I think after the kind of last few seasons of injury riddled and the production dipping after that incredible freshman year that he had, I think
hmm
he obviously decided it was better to come back and have a full healthy season and improve his draft stock for this year. On the defensive side, I never can pronounce his name, but J2 Tulamalu, I think that's how you say it. Another one of these guys that arguably could have been a first round pick. Um, really kind of strong player at the position. You just see him bully offensive tackles pretty much every week. And someone that when you see his name, it's hard not to think of that game against Penn State,
yeah.
where he had, I think it was 2 sacks, a fumble, forced fumble recovery, 2 interceptions, one for a pick six, got a tipped ball for another interception, and they all came in important parts of the games. And I think that's one of the best defensive performances I've ever seen, probably from a defensive player in college football. Um, he's one of those players that the production doesn't quite match the profile of the player. He's someone that is more, is projected to do the production will increase when he gets into the NFL kind of player. Is one of those kind of guys. But again, someone coming back along with Jack Sawyer as well,
hmm
arguably one of the best defensive, pass rushing duos in college football. Both of them could have been drafted. Both of them decided to come back. really good for him. The O-line's pretty much fully returning. Donovan Jackson, who arguably should have been a first, second round, third round pick, he's coming back. Bringing in the centre from Alabama as well, he was a pretty highly touted prospect, but didn't quite pan out for him as well in Alabama. But he's still a good player. So yeah, I just think overall, Denzel Burke, another one. I mean, Tyleik Williams. The list goes on really, and it was kind of shocking to see all of the players actually decide, that they're going to come back and try and. I think the elephant in the room reason is obviously they all want to come back and beat Michigan. I think it's kind of a taint on your Ohio State career if you've gone your entire Ohio State career like a lot of these guys have without beating Michigan. That's something I think a lot of these guys don't want on their records. So I think that must have played a part to a lot of them coming back.
Well, I was going to say one of my questions there would be as a lot of players come back, and you say you're not talking someone who, you could go in the third round. That'd be quite nice for you, wouldn't it? You'll go in third. No, you're talking first round potential talents here that are coming back. So my question was going to be, do you think that's a chip on the shoulder kind of this, an unfinished business kind of thing? Whether it's Michigan, whether it's a case of something I'll get onto in a second with making the championship games, for which something's happened. They've changed some stuff around in the Big Ten this year that means, that won't change. That will change the way they get people into the championship. Do you think it's a sense of unfinished business
100%.
for a lot of these players?
I mean, you even look at when CJ Stroud was entering the draft. There was all the. I mean, I don't think anyone quite believed it, but you even looked at the rumours then that he was debating maybe coming back. I mean, even you had some of the rumours with Marvin Harrison Jr. this year.
Yeah.
I think it's something that all of the group have clearly thought about. They clearly recognise that it's, like I said, it's something that they don't want to be known for. They don't want to be known as the group of the crop of players that went through their entire Ohio State career without being able to beat Michigan. In the end of the day, it's something that is so, it's arguably one of the most. You could go 4-7 on the season, but as long as you beat Michigan, it's not as bad. It's that big of a deal to Ohio State.
Yeah.
It's that big of a deal to Ohio State players and fans and everyone within the program. So I think 100%. It definitely plays a massive part of it. You look at the lack of the Big Ten championships as well, the Big Ten success over the few years. Yes, they had the run in 2022 when they nail-bitingly close against Georgia, could have won it on the field goal, ended up missing the field goal. But yeah, I think 100% it plays a massive part in why a lot of the players that like you said, not just players that you think they might get drafted in mid-round to late round. No, these are guys that were projected to either be first, second, or high round picks. So yeah, definitely played a part of it.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, absolutely. And it would also, I think, speak to the kind of culture that you've got with Ryan Day and the whole roster. And as well, I think it's not that I want to make this conversation about NIL deals or money or anything like that. If you go in the first round of the draft, what you stand to make is a lot more, or a considerable amount more than you probably make in NIL. So you can't even claim that it's about money, or wanting to just stay and make a bit more money.
100%.
So absolute fair play.
And I think that's a good. Just to quickly before you move on, I was going to say I think that's a good. The NIL thing is a good segue into. You look at the transfer portal, what they did in the transfer portal, as you previously mentioned. It wasn't just Caleb Downs they brought in. They brought in Quinshawn Judkins from Ole Miss.
Yes,
arguably one of the best running backs in college football the last 2 seasons. I think he's got over 2,700 rushing yards and like 34 total touchdowns in the last 2 years. Another one again, similar to Caleb Downs, was kind of like a whoa when that broke, and it was like wow. And then you look at the running back room, you got Travion Henderson and him. That's probably on paper now the best running back room in college football. Bringing in Will Howard from Kansas State, I think a solid veteran. I say veteran, but that usually applies to NFL terms. But veteran in terms of in the college terms of his, this is his 5th year now as a starter. I think, obviously starting, I think all 4 years at Kansas State, apart from 1 or 2 years, I think he couldn't finish because of injury. But bringing in an experienced player that's got kind of good experience against good other programs, and someone that I think they think is going to come in and start for them this year. And then also Julian Sayin from Alabama. I think we took like 3 or 4 players from that Alabama team, so I don't think they're too happy with Ohio State. But Julian Sayin is was a really highly touted prospect, really strong pedigree as a prospect. Someone that was really highly touted, great arm, great potential. And bringing him in to challenge for that starting role this year, or probably more likely start next year moving forward is another great get. So just to cap off all of the players that they brought in and how well they've done in not just the recruiting aspect of it, but like you said, with the modern game in college football now, NIL plays such a big deal of it. And if you're such a big program like Ohio State, you kind of get the luxury over a lot of other programs of having more money to spend in those transfer portals on the NIL. So
and looking at, I'm going to say I've got the On3 rankings up here. I did have the 24/7 ones up before. That's the 4th ranked class in the nation of recruits, only behind Georgia, Alabama, and Oregon. And it's the way they do it's like the 3 digits past the point. So it's it's only 0.004 of a rated class behind Oregon. That's you're talking a 3A and 3B in that position. And it's nice to, I guess, like you say, the last couple of seasons, a couple of those players maybe felt like they've been slighted. There were things that they haven't done that they would desperately want to do within their career at Ohio State. So to still have that power and that pull that only a few other schools have been able to do and potentially do better. Those ratings mean nothing until they put it together on the field. So, but yeah, to be hanging around Alabama, who've had a potentially odd off season, losing Nick Saban, and kind of bringing in Kalen DeBoer and maybe not knowing what their program is going to look like and what sort of foot Kalen DeBoer is going to have. It's you're absolutely you're swinging up there with the big boys. Not that you weren't one of the big boys anyway, but you're right up there, taking a lot of that. So to kind of start looking towards the end of this off season, we're now, as we're talking, pretty much in training camp. They're all in training camps and getting ready to prepare. We're 3 weeks away from week 0, which means we're 4 weeks away from the actual season starting.
Not long.
So we're really, really close. There are a couple of questions going into the season that I want to ask you about. And we've mentioned Will Howard. We mentioned Julian Sayin. And obviously, as we mentioned before, Kyle McCord leaving Ohio State on the way. There have been some questions around the starting QB position, and it is believed that Will Howard will be the starter, but there's a lot of talent in that QB room. And again, you mentioned some of the recruits that you brought in through high school. Is it Air
Noland? Yeah,
Air Noland. That's the one.
I'm not entirely sure. Like if that, I'm doubting that is his actual first name, and that's just what he likes to be referred to as. But everything that I see him, the name written down is as Air Noland. So he's a lefty as well. So always cool when you got a lefty.
Let's keep his politics out of this, please. So, but yeah, it's not the word. It's a nice little QB room to have over there. It's
certainly a big improvement on last year.
Yeah. So do you think? Would you personally as well say, again mentioning Will Howard, the experience that he has coming over from Kansas State, is that who you would also look and say, right, okay, just he's the obvious starter? Or
yeah, I think so. I mean, as I mentioned, the team is absolutely loaded, going for the national championship. So, in the end of the day, you want the person that you think has the best experience, and you don't want to throw in either the freshman in obviously Air Nolan's sense, or a redshirt freshman in Julian Sayin's sense. And this season isn't about trying to make what's the word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? Is trying in terms of trying to train that quarterback up.
Yeah.
For the future, you want a quarterback in there that can win now. And I think Will Howard, the experience that he has, he gives you that best bet really. I think unless one of the others show you something, so good in practice and that that you can't ignore, then maybe you do consider them. But like I said, I think Will Howard is probably going to be the starter to start the season.
Yeah.
I expect him and probably to hopefully be the starter for the whole season. You don't really want a quarterback controversy halfway through the season. So yeah, I do expect it to be Will Howard.
Yeah. And finally, again, just on, I guess, some of the questions somewhat that are around the season. Head coach Ryan Day, as you've mentioned as well, with some of those players returning, they have a record that no one at Ohio State wants, and that's throughout your career so far at Ohio State, haven't beat Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And you look towards the future. I know you're looking towards the future, and some of these things that, I guess, some things you don't realise if you're not into college football, how actually, so sometimes that rivalry game is just, it's that little bit more important than a national championship.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, again, I've said it in our chats before, as a Manchester City fan growing up, we could get relegated, win 2 games a year, and if both of those games are Man United, I'd be happy. That's it, end of story. That game just means that much more. Very similar for a lot of the rivalries in college football. You could have a winning record, you could make the playoffs, but 3 years of not beating Michigan puts you in a hot seat. 3 years of not quite actually getting there to the end would seem to put you in a hot seat, even if you look at it and say, "Whoa, you've only lost 2 games in your whole career." No, you're on a hot seat. Are you one of those who's looking at Ryan Day as someone who's in a hot seat this year? And is it what is it that takes him off that hot seat? Is it simply beating Michigan? Is it making the playoffs? Is it winning a national championship? And is there anything that could happen within that you think, even if you win a national championship or even if you beat Michigan, is still on that hot seat?
I mean, no. I mean, if he wins the national championship and beats Michigan, then 100% he's not on the hot seat. They probably give him a 10-year extension. But no, I think as someone that's obviously not as dialed in with Ohio State as obviously the people there in Columbus, I've only knew as much of Ryan Day when he became the coach, and obviously so for me the expectation is high for Ohio State. It's Ohio State. Their expectation should be high every single year. They're a prestigious program that should be competing at the top every year. So 100% if he loses to Michigan again this year and either doesn't make the college playoffs entirely or falters in the college playoffs, then I think you do have to look at bringing someone else in, because I think then you're almost kind of signalling that you're content with mediocrity almost, because you're not trying to improve. So yeah, I think 100% on the hot seat is to the extent that you can be as the coach of a team that is, like you said, has only lost a handful of, you can count on your hands how many games they've lost since he's been there. So for that being said, obviously if this was a smaller program, a smaller team, then obviously you're not going to be on the hot seat after the success that someone, the coach like he has had. But like I said, this is Ohio State. He's had incredibly good rosters. He's had incredibly good quarterbacks. When you look at Justin Fields and you look at CJ Stroud's, obviously Justin Fields, incredibly good college quarterback, not quite translated for him in the NFL, but still incredible at college. So yeah, I think just to answer your question, definitely on the hot seat. You look at Urban Meyer, I think he didn't lose to Michigan and won a national championship. That was the standard that was set before Ryan Day. So if 4 years down the line and he's unable to even replicate that in the slightest, then you probably have to look to get rid of him.
Yeah. So with that in mind, and I think you've nicely set up for how you may feel when it will go or should go the rest of this season. and it's safe to say you have moderate to high expectations for this team. So I think what we can do now is we'll just go have a look through some of this schedule.
Yep.
We'll pick out some game. We'll kind of go through the schedule anyway, but we'll pick out a couple of games that could be key games throughout the season. I want you to give me your win losses, all that sort of stuff, and then depending on where we get to at the end of it, whether you think they will make the playoffs or not. But we'll see in a few minutes. Starting the season off, you're at home to the world famous, absolutely incredible Akron Zips, whom if you look at my PlayStation, which tells no lies, they've won the last 3 MAC championships. So, in elite company there. And then you are at home to Western Michigan. I don't think we need to say too much on these games. Shall we safely say that's a 2-0 start?
It's a nice start to slowly ease in the new starter coming in this year. Will Howard, I'm sure, looked at that and went, "Yeah, I'll take that." That's a great way to kind of get properly incorporated, get everything right with the team, everything right with the offense, with the operations and stuff like that. That's a good 2-game start to figure all work all the kinks out and hopefully carry on that momentum going into the rest of the schedule.
One of the things that gets mentioned a lot in college football, and I'm not saying I want a genuine answer to this, and I know what the answer will be, but I'm asking it anyway, is banana skin games. And one of those, for almost any team, because of just the amount of turnover in a college team every year, is that first game of the season always has the potential to be a banana skin game. Maybe a couple of things just don't quite work out. Maybe that play that you're trying out just doesn't come off. You end up throwing a pick six backs and a fumble happens and it's returned.
Yeah.
Things can happen that the shocks, the underdogs winning. While the reason that they are underdogs winning is because we didn't see that coming in the first place.
Yeah.
Do you at all see this happening against Akron or Western Michigan? Is it a safe 2-0?
To go back to our previous conversation, if they lose to Akron in the first game or Western Michigan, they should probably sack Ryan Day then, because if you cannot lose either of those games. They are 2 games that you almost have to you have to chalk them as wins. You cannot afford to lose those games.
Yeah. And let's go then to straight after that. That's 2 weeks in, bye week straight away. Always a good time though, if those games do end, if that's say the Akron or Western Michigan game does get a little close. If you take the win, but it does get a little close at one point, it's a good time to kind of go, right, okay, what didn't work there? Would you like a bye week in week 3, or would you rather push that bye week until later on in the season?
I'm personally team later on in the season. I think if you have, it just gives you that. I don't know. I think it just gives you more kind of, if you've got injuries and stuff, you're dealing with wear and tear throughout the season. I think it's better to have it later on in the season. You don't want it too early. I mean, week 2 is just, week 3 or whatever it is. Sorry. There's no wear and tear on the body at that point. So it's not as beneficial to have the rest period then than it is to have it later on in the season when there is more wear and tear on the body. So I'll always lean to being in the camp of having a later bye week. Not too late, obviously. Like in the NFL, you wouldn't want it at week 15 or week 16 or something. Of course not. But in terms of you'd rather at week 10 or afterwards than in the NFL or kind of week 6 or week 7 in college football.
It's interesting to see as well, though, just looking across the whole Big Ten schedule. Penn State, Rutgers, and USC all have a bye week in week 3. And then looking here at week 2, Purdue and UCLA have a bye week in week 2. And obviously at that point, other teams then start. It's not like there's a gap between everyone else's bye week. They start slowly rolling through. At least you're not in week 2, I guess, having that bye week as well. But you don't want to be in with that group having that bye week there. And I would totally agree with you on that one. So next up comes a 4-game stretch before your next bye week. We'll take a quick look at them. You've got Marshall at home.
Yeah, we are Marshall.
Are we win-loss.
Similar to the other two. That has to be a win. That game.
Okay, so 3 games at home so far. 4 weeks into the season, 3-0.
Yeah,
Good
3-0. I expect also good numbers. I expect the offense to be beaten up on those teams and be one of the putting up the best numbers in the league after the first 3 weeks.
Especially against Marshall. I think even more so against Marshall. If you've had 2 weeks to start the offense working together, then you've had a bye week to work out any of those kinks. Now you're working. You'd expect Marshall to, the offense to have an absolute day of it. You'd expect to start seeing Julian saying coming out in the second half. You want to see some of those players getting rest towards the end of that game.
That's probably going to be like a 28-point spread, probably on that one at least.
Exactly. Then you're looking at playing Michigan State at Michigan State.
Yep.
I'd like to say that, much like the saying gets said about the SEC, there's no easy games in the Big Ten, but some games are a little bit easier than others. Let's say it how it is. Michigan State away.
Win.
How do you see that one going? Win.
Yeah. They're not quite as good as they were maybe 5-6 years ago when they went on a bit of run of even finishing ahead of Michigan for a few of those seasons, but obviously never Ohio State. But no, I think that's definitely probably a win. Obviously, being at Michigan State is you'd probably prefer that to be at Ohio State, but again, that should be a relatively comfortable win.
Yeah. And they're coming in fresh off a trip to Boston College as well. So it's
always tough, Boston College.
But it's a little bit more of I think that's a little bit for Michigan State. That's a prelude that's a bit more difficult than Marshall at home for you guys. Yeah. So then you've got Iowa turning up in Ohio again. Win.
Yeah, that's a win. You look at their offensive output the last few seasons, they're almost offensively inept. I think their best player last year was the punter. And they lost him. So, he got drafted this year. They obviously lost Trooper DeJean as well, one of their best players on that defense. That defense can be pretty like sneakily good. But no, I think that should be another relatively comfortable win.
Well, the two things about Iowa that I bought, it's Titans University. Seems to just pump out Titans for fun. And then it's one of the teams that, you look at the Big Ten is about big bruising defenses.
Yeah. Proper blue collar.
Yeah. It's big bruising defenses, the ones that are going to they're going to hurt when you get tackled. You are going to take hits. And Iowa is one of those very, very tough teams defensively, but I say that should come out as a win for Ohio. Now, you're going up to week 7.
The big one.
You are 5-0.
Yep.
With a bye week. You've had a little bit of a rest in there as well. New Boys, Oregon. Yep. I said to Chapman that the other day that the Big Ten is going through something I do genuinely think is a bit similar to the SEC, maybe not to as quality, but your current champions are on a down year, or more than likely on a down year, so Michigan and Alabama. You've got there's 2 teams in those conferences. The other team that are usually the one that's also up there, big and bruising, in Ohio State, it's theirs to lose.
Yep.
They are the ones who everyone's looking to, but there are a couple of new boys, and one of them's going to look to disrupt all of that. The SEC has Texas. The Big Ten now has Oregon, who look to be the big disruptors this year.
Yep.
You go to Oregon, and Oregon, who've just come off a trip to UCLA, which in those circumstances they are far more used to that because they come from the same conference. They're used to that trip a bit more.
It's a game they're relatively comfortable with because like you said, they're used to it.
So they're used to that travel. Then they've got Michigan State at home, and then welcome Ohio State. And I only say that because the running is also a big indicator on how big and bruised or how much you've had to fight in games beforehand will turn out to be. That Oregon trip is not one that necessarily Ohio State will be used to. Some of those trips, Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue, Penn State, whatever. We're going to have to get used to those trips over to that side of the country. How do you see that game going, and do you see that being a potential preview of the Big Ten Championship, I guess?
Yeah, I think probably so. I think they're two teams. They've probably got the two highest odds in when you look at all the sites of winning the Big Ten. So, pardon me. Yeah, I think that's the one that I kind of circled you when the schedule came out. As you said, they're the new boys on the block. They're a team that previously you don't get to see as much, like, because obviously they're in a different conference. And yes, we obviously saw them in 2014 when we beat them in the national championship. So hopefully we can have similar success against them now in the Big Ten. Now they're here, but no, I think that's probably going to be their. Yeah, I think that will be their toughest game, other than the Michigan game, just because of the semantics that go into playing Michigan. That's not always just about the teams on paper.
Yeah.
That's just so much more than that, as we've mentioned. So I think other than the Michigan game, that is the toughest game. That is the biggest challenge. But I do still expect them to win that game. You look at the players that Oregon lost in the draft, arguably their two best players, the two most important players on offense in Troy Franklin and Bo Nix. So, yeah, I mean, as much as I bashed on Bo Nix, he was incredibly good for him. So, yeah, I think that's going to be the toughest game. I do think it will be the biggest challenge, like I said, other than the Michigan game, but I do still expect them to win that game.
Anyone who's listening who doesn't or hasn't watched Herd of the Line, only one person we know can claim that they truly believed in Bo Nix, and that it will be David from Herd of the Line, who somehow managed to get Bo Nix at the 12th pick. Correct.
I know.
But no, you're right, and I think one question within that, we'll take that as, I'm going to take that as you saying you go 6-0 there. There's your 6-0. You have a bye week straight after. Does that give you the freedom and ability to, one, again, with making that trip, not necessarily used to going over to that side of the country again, does that bye week after give you that little bit more freedom to go for it in that game? You've not got a game straight away the week after. You can go get a little bit more rest. So
yeah, definitely helps. Yeah. Like you said, gives you, you're not. You know that you got an extra week off that week, so you might be willing to push it a little bit further than you normally would in terms of the, on the health side of it. So
yeah.
So yeah, that probably does play a good, is a benefit in some way.
And one thing I will say about Oregon as well, just to kind of, as we move on and go past this bye week, Oregon's bye weeks are well spread. So they've got the bye week after you in week 4.
Yeah.
And then their next bye week is in week 13. So that is one hell of a stretch of games to continuously play. Whereas you've at least got those bye weeks. You've got a run here of 6 games at the end of the season. Maybe not ideal if you want a bit of rest. If you're going into the Big Ten Championship, if you're going in to a playoff run, maybe it would be nice to not have to have that, but there may be a caveat in that we can talk about in a minute. Next up, you've got Nebraska at home. Now, Nebraska is one of those teams for me I felt has been a bit underwhelming. I feel like they should be and really should be doing better. Don't know how this season's going to look.
Well, they got Dylan Raiola copying Patrick Mahomes pretty much bar for bar with the hair and the goatee and everything and the sunglasses. Yeah. So I think he's hoping and they're hoping that he has a Patrick Mahomes type season for
them. But would you again? How do you see that game going? Is that when you're chalking off as a win already?
I mean, like you said, you don't want to say that there's easy games per se, or that every game is, other than the Michigan and these teams' games are easy. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I do. As with that being said, I do expect them to again comfortably win that game.
Okay, so we're at week. Let me just trip. We're at week 9. You are 7-0.
Yep.
Last 5 games, the run in here is you go away to Penn State.
Yep, always
Straight up
fun. Always fun to go and play in there. Great stadium, arguably one of the best stadiums and pardon me, best atmospheres in college football. So that's always an awesome game to watch on TV as well.
I think they won. It's not like a real massive award, I don't think. But the Athletic did over the spring, did like best stadiums in college football thing, and Penn State won quite comfortably.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
That will be arguably in that stretch probably the toughest, if not one of the toughest. Penn State are always one of those teams that are there and thereabouts in the Big Ten. That's one where I think we both. You can't take that one for granted.
No. I think that's you look at that, and that's arguably, after, like I said, as I mentioned, with Oregon and Michigan being probably the two toughest games. I think that's arguably the next on that list. As you mentioned, Penn State always there or thereabouts. You got the quarterback that I think is, he's got. Can't remember his name, but he's got all the kind of talent and just hasn't quite. The projection hasn't quite been there, but you do, in the back of your mind, worry maybe, that he can just have one of those. That's the one, Drew Aller. You do kind of worry that maybe he will get it together all in that one game against you, and he will have that great game that they've been expecting him to have the last 2 years. But no, I think that will be again could be a sneaky tough game. Again, with it being in Penn State, that does add to that atmosphere is incredible. It's very hard to hear yourselves in the huddle and hear yourselves on the line when you got the crowd that loud. I think it's over 100,000 they got there. I think it's like 110 nearly. So incredible atmosphere, incredibly loud. So always going to be a tough environment to play in. But again, I just think Ohio State have got too much talent on the roster compared to Penn State. So that's another game that you do expect Ohio State to win. They will be favoured in that game. I think they'll be favoured in every game this season in the regular season. So maybe not the Oregon game. That's the only game you could maybe see them not being favoured in if Oregon are putting up 50 points up until that point or something like that. But no. So tough game. Like I said, probably maybe one of the tougher games of the year in the regular season. But again, like I've said on every other game, I expect them to win the game.
I wanted to ask if it'd be a banana skin game, but with the connotations of what a banana skin game is, I think there's a little disrespectful on Penn State.
Yeah,
because
100%. Yeah.
Banana skin is a one where you accidentally slip and lose. If you lose to Penn State are a damn good team, and it's a slight on them to say anything different. So, but we'll take that. You'll take that. Going in unbeaten so far into the last 4 games of the season.
Yep.
You've got a 4-game stretch all at home, with Purdue, Northwestern, and Indiana, the first 3 of those. How do you see that stretch going?
First 3 wins, this classic Big Ten. That's Big Ten football, really, isn't it? Purdue, Northwestern, and Indiana doesn't get as Midwest and as Big Ten as that, really. But no, all those 3 games, similar things as I've mentioned to the other ones. That you're expected to win those games. You're going to be favoured in those games. The talent on the roster just exceeds that on all of those rosters, and you expect them to win all 3 of those games, and hopefully setting up going into Michigan undefeated on the season.
Yeah. Okay, so as you mentioned there, the game that you play at the end of the season, it's the game. We've seen this argument happen, haven't we, Ollie? And we've both of us go, there's a reason it is called
the
game.
Yeah.
Michigan, Ohio State. Now, I'm going to try and be as neutral with this one as possible. It's difficult, but 3 years without a win.
Yeah.
Against Michigan. Oh, what happened there? 3 years without a win against Michigan. A lot of starters returning. Arguably one of, if not the best roster in all of college football. Against a Michigan team with a brand new head coach.
Yep.
And a lot of new coaching staff.
New quarterback.
Tipped to be it's a bit of a rebuild year for Michigan, whom I think hopefully just make a bowl game.
Yeah.
And I think we'll make a bowl game, but we're not in a particularly challenging position. You never know what will happen. Maybe Sharon Moore just somehow, he just makes it work. It happens to work, and we've seen that happen before in college
crazy
football.
things have happened.
It's a game that at home you're 11-0. The Ohio State crowd is rocking. I personally can't see a way that Ohio State doesn't actually take that game and go unbeaten. If you're unbeaten by that point, I see that's a 12-0 record on the season.
You're looking at arguably, obviously depending how everything's going over in the SEC, if there is an undefeated team over there, then probably not. But as you mentioned, with the kind of the teams going into the SEC, maybe one of those, maybe Georgia do lose a game or drop a game in that year. So you're looking at you're not just looking at beating Michigan and going undefeated. You're arguably looking at first seed in the playoffs, number one in the rankings. So yeah, like you said, so much going into that, so much weighing on that game. It's not. And in the end of the day, with everything I've just said, with the rankings, the one seed, everything, none of that is anywhere near as important as the simple fact of just beating Michigan. You haven't beaten them in 3 years. I think 2019 now, obviously, because they didn't play the 2020 game, which is Michigan were being kind of bitchy about about how they wanted to play their games that year compared to Ohio State, so they ended up not playing that year. Obviously, technically haven't beaten Michigan since 2019 when we slapped you 56-27, I believe it was, that game. Obviously, what was it? Was it 8-game winning streak before this current losing streak? Ohio State were on top. Like as I mentioned previously with Urban Meyer, winning all those games against Michigan. Jim Harbaugh's still only even with the 3 wins, he's got a losing record against Ohio State. So, yeah, I think we will be favoured. As you said, this is kind of a rebuild year for Michigan. You probably don't expect them to be as good this year as they have been the last 3 years. But as I've mentioned previously, it is Michigan. As you've mentioned, it is the game. There's so much that goes into it. There's so much pressure on both teams, on both set of players, on both set of coaching staffs, that you never know that on the day some of those players might not be able to take that, and you might have a more talented team, but if you can't handle that pressure, then you might lose that game. So I do think they will be favoured. I really do hope they win, and I do expect them to win, but because of what I've said, you can't chalk that in any way as a win. It's silly to chalk a Michigan team, even if they're 7 and only got 7 wins, 5 wins, 6 wins, whatever. It'd be silly to chalk them off as a guaranteed win. It's like I've said, it's Michigan.
It's one of those things where we all know that at the end of the NFL season, those week 8, well, they're officially week 18, aren't they? Even though they're everyone's 17th game.
Yep.
The NFL put them in there as all divisional games. Because at the end of the day, if you're 3-13 in week 7, in that week 18 game going into it, you still want to turn up to go and beat your divisional rival wherever you're playing. It just adds that little bit extra to that final game of the season. Similar to games like this, you put those rivalry games at the end of the season, because then, if you're Michigan, let's say Michigan are 8-3. We're not up there in the college rankings at that moment in time, probably not going to get in there into the playoff rankings.
Well, if you beat Ohio State at 7-3, you'd make it, obviously, with the expanded college playoff system.
Possibly.
Now you never know, but
even if all things look against Michigan going into, Michigan have say we have one of those slip ups. If Texas beat us in week 2.
Yeah.
Which I can very much see. I can see happening. If I'm not saying it'll be Fresno or Arkansas State, but banana skin games, they happen. They're the ones that you really don't see coming. A Fresno State or an Arkansas State is one of those games you'd never see coming. Yeah. So I'm looking at them and think, if one of those games, if it's USC that we don't quite beat, or Illinois, or just one of those banana skin games, you're way down in the polls. But it gives you something to play for at the end of the year, even if you want waiting for a bowl game. So, Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
But,
you could be 0-10 and going into that game, and it's still
yeah,
you still don't need any extra motivation to beat Ohio State as a Michigan player, and
no.
the same vice versa.
So, but if I did have to push you and say, even if you toss a coin, Ohio State, Michigan, are you taking Ohio State on this one?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is the year they finally end the losing streak. Ryan Day finally puts all of the talk to bed about not being able to beat Michigan, and yeah, I think the roster on the talent, as I've alluded to with some of the other games, I think Ohio State are arguably one of, if not the best roster in college football next season. So if everything goes to plan as I've predicted in this format, and they are undefeated at this point, and they are rolling, and they've got the momentum, then yeah, I do expect them winning that game, and hopefully blowing them out like they did last time. The last time they beat them.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna pose a scenario to you, because if you're 12-0 when you beat Oregon, well, you're in the Big Ten championship game. End of story. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pose a scenario to you just to make this last bit a little bit more interesting. Say Oregon win,
Yep.
but Michigan beat Oregon later in the season. Michigan are 9-3 or something at that point. So again,
So do you mean as in Oregon beat Ohio State?
Oregon beat Ohio
Yeah.
State, Michigan beat Oregon.
Yeah.
So going into that game, you're both 11-1.
Yeah.
Both ending the season, you're 11-1 going into the championship game. Now, last year, two 11-1 teams, or 12-0 and an 11-1 team, wouldn't make it into the Big Ten championship
Yeah.
potentially, as happened last year, because of the way they split the conference into East and West divisions.
Yeah.
With the additions, I think, of the big, of your USC's and UCLA's and Washington's and Oregon's and whatnot.
Yeah. The Pac-12 does.
With those additions, it makes it a lot more difficult to have an Eastern and Western conference.
Yeah.
So I think they've scrapped the Eastern Western conference,
Which I think is good.
so the two teams with the best winning record will go into the championship game. Because I think it was 11-1 Ohio State went last year, wasn't it? And it ended up being, was it Penn State or Iowa, who were 10-2, who went to the championship game.
In the other, yeah.
Yeah, it was Iowa went to the championship game with a 10-2 record, despite Ohio having an 11-1 record and not making the championship game, which sounds silly, but because of the conference, the divisions. You and Oregon are both 11-1, heading into the championship game. I just wanted to make that point, by the way. How do you see that? Would you see that one going? Do you think this is why was the Oregon game a preview of what's to come, or are we looking at two potentially completely different teams going into that championship?
See, I thought you were going to give me the. I thought you were going to make me decide between either I thought you were going to come up with a scenario where it was the last game of the season against Michigan meant that if we beat Michigan, if we, whatever it was you wanted me to say, that I'd rather either lose to Michigan and make the Big Ten, or beat Michigan and not make the Big Ten. I thought you were going to try and do that, which if was the case, then it would still be beat Michigan. But no, I think if you do lose that game to Oregon, then yeah, I think it. I mean, to answer your question, I suppose I've said with all of the games, I've drank the Kool-Aid. I predicted them to beat Oregon in the first place anyway. So even if they do lose that game, I would still expect them to win the second game.
So that takes you nicely into the playoffs. And if I'm right, the Power Four conferences get essentially a bye week in that first round of the playoffs, which is really nice. And this is why I was mentioning before, because I'm getting really good at this whole throwing back to things we talked about previously. Yes, you've got a run of 6 games to end the season. Admittedly 4 at home, but it does get to become a long run, and you might want one of those bye weeks towards the end. You're okay, because you probably have a bye week then.
Yeah.
Anyway, to get some of that rest after a Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
Oregon having a bye week 2 weeks before, does that change anything for you if they have the bye week in week 13, then play Washington at home?
No.
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 So chances are, like I say, you're looking at going into you are in the playoffs, and you will, as a Big Ten champion, you'll have a bye week.
Yep.
You will have beaten Oregon twice, including on the road.
Yeah,
You will have beaten Michigan.
we assume so. Yeah, obviously we're assuming that they don't lose many more games than that Ohio State game.
You beat Penn State away.
Yep.
You beat Michigan at home, which again will always be looked favourably upon by the people who make the and obviously you beat the absolute insanely good Akron Zips, and that's just got to send you that could just land you in a comfortable number one position anyway.
Exactly.
Georgia, who have a not nice schedule, could make it. Do you think? I mean, I'd like to go into seedings, but that's not, I guess, the most important. The most important thing is you get that bye week and you're in.
Yeah. I mean, as I alluded to, like I said, I mean, like you just said, SEC, maybe Georgia, they do have a relatively tough schedule this season. Maybe they do drop at least a game in the regular season. That means that Ohio State, obviously, in this scenario with an undefeated record, Big Ten championship, should then in that scenario be the first seed. So.
Yeah,
but like you said, regardless, they'll get the bye anyway as the Big Ten champion.
It's some of those things though, as we've seen over the years. You look at FSU not making the playoffs last year, despite being 13-0 at that point, and certain teams having lesser records, and making it into that top four. It happens at the end of the day. Some of those decisions we will never quite understand why they make them.
Yep.
But that's part and parcel. You'd like to say that's part of the fun of it, but really not. It's a few guys in suits.
Yeah.
And that's never the bit that makes it fun.
Yeah.
So
well, we'll never have that as much, to as bad of an extent now with obviously the expansion to the playoffs. So
yeah. But there will be some eyebrow raisers every year.
There'll still always be a couple, yeah. But it'll be between a kind of an Oklahoma and a maybe, I don't know, like an Arizona or something, rather than it will be deciding between Alabama and Ohio State.
Yeah. So after this, then you've got that bye week. Do you reckon it's all the way? Is it all the way? Does it depend on what running you end up getting? Because obviously you'd like to. It's daft to say otherwise. No one will say otherwise. You'd like the slightly nicer running. If you end up playing TCU, who end up representing the group of five, you're going to be very happy coming up against TCU in that round.
Michigan found it quite difficult against TCU, but no, I agree with your point. Sorry, I just had to throw that one in there. Carry on your point.
So you'd like the nicer run in the playoffs, and although if you want to be national champions, you want to beat the best.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But to beat the best, you just want to get there. To be honest.
Yeah.
All the way. Are you predicting at this point with a bye with the top four seeding all the way?
Yeah, all the way to the national championship game. Like I said, obviously Georgia, Ohio State, probably the most likely 1 and 2 seeds. So. Don't have to play them in any of the running until you get to the national championship game. You've mentioned previously Alabama kind of maybe going to not be hopefully as good, but at the end of the day, it is Alabama. They always seem to be, even on their down years, it's still Alabama. So, but no, I do think all the way to the national championship game, yeah.
Lovely. So,
and then
with
that brings
in
up
mind,
the big question of, do they win it?
Well, do you want to go that far? Do you want to kind of plant your flag there? You'd never been too one to shy away from putting your flag down and going, "You're damn right, we'll do it."
It will be. I don't want to, disrespect Georgia in any way by doing that, because I do think Georgia are the standard in the last 5 years. I mean, they are, as Chapman alluded to on the episode you've done with him. That what Kirby Smart has done there and his ability to reload every year is just incredible. So I'm never ever going to just, as I mentioned with the Michigan game, because of obviously the semantics that go into that, with it being the rivalry, I'd never chalk that off. Kind of similar with Georgia, you're not going to just chalk that as we should win that game. But where's the fun in sitting on the fence? So yeah, all the way. National championship winners, first national championship since 2014, and putting to bed all the discourse of the last few years that Ryan Day's faced, and joining the other great Ohio State coaches as national champion winners.
Sounds like a true man who's never spent an hour picking splinters out of his backside because he sat on a fence for so long. With that in mind, as we look towards the end of the season, another thing happens at the end of the season. Little trophies are won called your Heismans, your Jim Thorpes, your whatnots. And then a few weeks later, after the Super Bowl happens in the NFL, a little event happens in Indianapolis where a lot of players from college get together and do some do like a sports day type event, and then a couple of months later, they're all walking out on stage. Next year it'll be in Green Bay, Wisconsin, as they are selected to most of them will walk on stage anyway. I've got a chunk of them will. Some will just get phone calls at home as they get selected to go into the NFL, hopefully. With those in mind, for people who may not be as familiar with college football, they will hopefully at least be familiar with the draft. If you to someone who's starting to get into college football, who would you be looking at this year from Ohio State?
Yeah.
Who may be a name you might hear in the draft?
Yeah.
Next year, who might be a name you hear as a Heisman winner? Who might be a name you hear going up for other various awards? Basically, who to look out for this year?
It's kind of crazy. You look at all the talent Ohio State have had on the roster. The last God knows how long. And they haven't had a Heisman winner since 2006, I believe. Was it Troy Smith? Was their last Heisman winner? Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that is the case. And so I don't think we're looking Heisman. I think our best kind of bet of the last few years at that award was obviously Justin Fields and CJ Stroud. It does tend to be kind of similar with the MVP award in the NFL. It does seem to be a quarterback award, and as good as I think this team will be this year, and as I've just kind of waxed lyrical about how I think they're going to win a national championship. I don't think there's going to be that individual player in terms of I don't think. You never know. If Will Howard throws for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, and he's obviously going to be in the conversation. But I think when you look at other guys within college football, you look at people like Quinn Ewers and the Georgia quarterback Beck, whatever his name is, and other guys like that. I just think it's with the way the politics of the award and kind of how it's not really. Like I said, it kind of just goes to whatever quarterback puts up the best numbers that year in college football. I don't think you're going to be looking at Heisman winners. But to mention, just to go back to your point about the draft, I think, as I've mentioned in this discussion, you look at all the players this year that could have even been first-round picks the year just been. If this happens and this scenario happens and they do win the national championship, then you expect them all to have good years. So that's only going to increase all of their draft stock. You look at Emeka Ibuka, he could end up being, one of the first wide receiver taken off the board next year. Trayvon Henderson could end up being, running back one along with what's his name, the guy we brought in, Judkins as well. Both of them could realistically be challenging for that top running back spot next year. So if you're looking at those kind of guys, from Ohio State going into the draft next year, then obviously, on offense you will have Emeka Ibuka, Trayvon Henderson. Defense, you've obviously got J2 Tulamalu, that, as I mentioned, that's definitely not how you say his name, but that's the best bet I've got. Jack Sawyer, another one, guys like these. You look at maybe even Sonny Styles, the linebacker, kind of safety hybrid guy that was almost kind of like the Caleb Downs before Caleb Downs, but never actually managed to live up to that thing, but was viewed as a prospect as a similar kind of guy as, like this kind of really good safety prospect slash linebacker with Sonny Styles' case. But I think he's someone that if he does have a good year, could put his name back in that draft process. And a Tyleik Williams as well. I think that kind of free tech defensive tackle role is so coveted in the NFL that if he's able to put on a similar display to last year and show that he can be a productive pass rusher from that defensive tackle position, then that's, like I said, that's so highly coveted in the NFL that even someone like that you could see going in the first round. So whole lot of talent on the roster. whole lot of guys that, any of them that will be draft eligible next year, you probably should keep your eye on, because, as I said, there's just so much talent on this roster that I think that if they do have a good year, and as I've kind of predicted on this, they do end up winning the national championship and going undefeated, then yeah, these guys are going to get drafted pretty high.
Sound. Okay, so basically, yeah, just watch our... Well, oh, God, it feels dirty to say. Just watch Ohio State this year if you want to see some quality play. On that note, I must ask, how can we find you and get hold of you if any Ohio State fans are listening and want to get in touch, or any other NFL fans, college football fans? How can we find you?
Yep, so as you probably guessed, with me being an Ohio State fan, I am also a Browns fan. Don't think Fletch has heard me say that enough. So you can find my personal kind of just, my Browns Twitter account, and my personal account is UK Browns NFL. Luckily managed to get that handle for every single social media page, because fortunately no one had come up with it yet. So that's my handle, my Browns kind of personal handle for all the social medias. As you've obviously mentioned, I do Hurdle the Line with my wonderful producer Fletch, who obviously you are Fletch, but I have to say that anyway. I promise you he didn't pay me to say that. No, obviously, yeah, I do Hurdle the Line, part of the Asleep at Work network. The amazing stuff that you have going on over there is, it's wonderful to be a part of that. You can find obviously that at the AAW. Is it AAW _ on all the socials?
On Twitter, yes. On Twitter, Instagram,
but
it's
the
just
other one's
AAW network.
just AAW network. And I have also just recently started doing another podcast with Tom from obviously Hurdle the Line called Midnight Sports. And you can find that with either a Midnight Sports podcast on YouTube and Spotify, or the Twitters is just _ Midnight Sports. So that's where you can find all me socials and find out everything that I'm doing, and come and find me. Maybe I'm not. You might not think I'd be quite as optimistic about the Browns, given the lack of success that they've had compared to Ohio State, but you can come and find me. Definitely do have that enthusiasm for the Browns at the minute. It's quite a good time to be a Cleveland sports fan and an Ohio sports fan in general. When you look at all the teams at the minute, so it's brilliant to be a part of that as a fan. So as you said, if there's any Ohio State fans listening, Browns fans listening, I encourage you to come follow me, come listen to my the content that I'm a part of, and join the community.
Definitely. If I could say anything about you, one thing you lack, it would not be enthusiasm at all for anything. So appreciate that, my friend.
Yep.
Don't forget, you can go check out this. As the point of this release, we've just gone through the top 25 and college football playoff, and just some of the ideas we've got going through that on the college football podcast, which you can find on our YouTube and on all the audio platforms. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to start shaking things up as we get ready for week 0, and tune in for a couple more of these. We'll have an FSU one, we will have a Michigan one, and I won't be the one answering the questions either. And hopefully we will have a couple more teams that we can put in focus. Until then, appreciate you, Wally. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
No worries, been a pleasure.